Started. Right. Welcome everybody to our first risk insurance meeting, I think, of the term. So it's been 6 months since we had one. We're going to begin the meeting with a whakatau and karakia in recognition of members.
Yeah, tēnā rā tātou. Scott, I'm speaking next because I always forget my order. We're going to begin with just a very short whakatau to welcome our new whānau to our building and to our wider hapori o whānau as well. So, tēnei te mihi ki a tātou. He karakia whakatuwhia I tēnei ata. Tūtawa mai I ruka, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa. Haumi e, the huie.
Thank you.
Te mihi tuatahi te whare e tū nei, te korawai o tēnei kaupapa, a tēnā koe. Ko raki nui e tū I konei, ko papatoa nuku I taka tōnei, a tēnā kōro. E ngā mate tuatini tini, e ngā mate rau āriki haere e moni. Ka huri ki te hunga ora, tēnā tātou, mōrena. Kei a koe e te tia mana, e te rangatira, tēnā kōrua. Ki ngā mema hau, o te komiti, nau mai, piki mai, kake mai, a whakatau mai ki roto I tēnei whānau. Tēnei mātou, ngā whānau o te kaunihira ārohe, whakatipu ai Māori, me wānaka, me hawe hoki. Nō reira, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manua nui, ki roto I te kaupapa nui tēnei, a tēnā tātou katoa. So you don't get a waiata from me. I did promise Nikki that there would be a waiata, but I'm not as good at my whai kōrero as some of my colleagues at council, and so no one came to back up dance for me today. So, ko amu just talking what tēnei te uri o Ngāti Whātua Ōrake me Ngāpahi Hoki, so I am the Market Strategy Partnerships Manager at QLDC. Hail from a very beautiful piece of whenua, which I'm sure Juliet can agree to. Yeah, I'm the Market Strategy Partnerships Manager. So one of the things that we've been doing in my 2.5 years of coming here is slowly but surely ensuring that we welcome and we farewell our people the best that we can. And we do that in certain levels of importance, and so we wanted to come and acknowledge our new independent members of this committee, and for me to personally assure you that I hold no risk with that. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, ka karawhiua, ka hoa atu te rākau. Do you want to have a...
Just to say welcome. Lovely to see two of you in person. Alistair on the screen, thank you. And I'm sure we'll look forward to meeting you. I'm just here to drop in to say welcome, and then I'm going to let Councillor Glading chair the meeting, and I'm just going to not cramp anybody's silence. So thank you for being here. So I hope you have a really good session.
Sure. Thank you. Joanne, thank you very much. Right. We begin. So just everybody, the meeting will be recorded and published on YouTube and QLDC website after the meeting. I'd just like to say a special welcome to our new members. So we have Juliet Tainui Fernandez, Matt Moet, and on screen, Alistair Hughes, I believe in South Australia. And just also wanted to say a quick thank you to departing members. So we're a completely reconstituted committee. Wanted to say thank you to the past chair, Stuart McLaughlin, and also Bill Moran and Heath Copeland, who is now a councillor. I think they've all served about 6 years on the committee, and yeah, quite well served. So right, on to apologies. No apologies have been received. Declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest?
You have a conflict of interest in relation to item number 9, and I will be stepping out of the room when you have the discussion on that.
Thank you. Apologies, I also failed to mention Councillor Brent, Stephen Brent, and Councillor Samuel Belt, otherwise known as Q. We also have our interim chief executive Michelle Moss at the table and general manager of finance.
Finance Assurance and Risk.
Catherine Harper. Apologies. Right. On to public forum. We have no speakers registered for public forum. No matters lying on the table. Confirmation of the agenda. I'd like to move that the agenda be confirmed without additional alteration. Do I have a seconder?
Second that.
Thank you, Stephen. All in favour? Right. Item 1, risk management update. So I'd like to invite to the table Gareth Noble, our assurance and risk manager. Same title, right? And Ian Dunbar. To the table. Thank you. We have very limited time this meeting, so I've asked if we can just take the papers as read. But I do believe you have one update for us.
With your permission, Chair, I just want to provide an initial introduction to my role. The committee, obviously the independents weren't involved in the induction process, then provide a correction, just so that we understand the difference between the published agenda and what we're looking at today. And then I'm going to hand over to Ian. One of the critical components, I suppose, of my paper is an update around risk context. And there has been a significant change since my paper was confirmed with the agenda. So it's going to touch on some of our business continuity planning activities associated with the Iran conflict. So firstly, I'm Gareth Noble, I'm the Assurance and Risk Manager. I'm one half of the Assurance and Risk team. We're going to hear from the other half later, Mariano Neviero, who's our Internal Audit Manager. I have 20 years experience in local government, both in the UK and then here in New Zealand, initially at Auckland Regional Council, Auckland Council. I am a certified quality auditor, MBA qualified, and will go through the process of getting my chartership from an accountancy perspective, so I'm a provisional chartered accountant. I'll give you an overview of Mariano's experience when he is in front of you. In terms of corrections today, my apologies, there was an error in terms of the attached versions of the risk management policy. So I have circulated, and you have in front of you updated versions of each of those. Essentially, the roles and responsibility tables in the version that was published were in error. They didn't show the critical changes that we're talking about today. So what you have in front of you now has that information updated. Happy to touch with your permission on what the differences between those three are. So essentially option 1, you'll see the one in the top right hand corner hopefully, is for all intents and purposes from a roles and responsibilities perspective status quo. That means that the chief executive and obviously currently the interim chief executive would approve the internal audit programme. Option 2 is this committee approving the internal audit programme. Option 3 is that this committee would make a recommendation to council for council approving the internal audit programme. And again, just to close that out, the recommendation that we have in the paper is for option 3. The committee obviously recommend the internal audit programme that's prepared by the internal audit manager for council to approve and amend. Only other thing I wanted to touch on, given that this is the first meeting, is what's the purpose of this paper? Very briefly, so ultimately this paper gives you an update in terms of the current risk context the council is facing. We look at internal risks, so risks to us as an organisation, and external risks, risks to the community. Both of those are covered off. And I suppose the key point there is that we don't necessarily control all of the things that influence both the organisation and in particular the externals, but we do have a role to play in that regard in many cases, and we manage that through our risk register. That was it. Thank you.
Fantastic, anticipated well. Right, so I want to open the floor now for questions from the members. Anyone have any questions for?
Did we want an update?
Have
from
the
you?
update first.
Yeah.
That's one.
Just
So
to jump in?
thanks, Ian.
Yeah, cool. So I'm just going to give you a quick update on the work that we've been doing internally around business continuity planning and risk assessment around the Middle East fuel crisis and what the implications of that might be for QLDC. So there's really three things that we've been looking at. The first one is all about understanding our operational services fuel dependency. So understanding what are all of the operational services that we undertake that have some fuel dependency. What is that fuel dependency in terms of usage? Is that service what we call a lifeline service or an essential service, which is defined by government, or is it something that we would consider non-essential, which doesn't mean that it wouldn't have consequences of not doing it, but wouldn't be protected under crisis management? We've got an understanding of what the minimum service levels would be that we would propose to implement in the event of some sort of fuel restriction or fuel rationing. And we've also got an understanding of what any voluntary fuel reduction activities might look like. So that's all complete for operational services. And we had to submit that information to the local government fuel response unit, which is a team that's been stood up inside MB. So, but that work is all complete. The second piece of work is focused on capital projects, and that work is scheduled to be finished this week. That's effectively looking at all of the capital projects that are either in construction or delivery phase at the moment. What's the nature of their fuel dependency activity? So understanding what it is that we're consuming fuel in that project for, either us or our contractors. Again, what that fuel consumption level is, and looking at what would be our potential approach should there be some sort of fuel restriction or fuel prioritisation, and how would that impact that capital project. And also looking at what other supply chain disruption may affect that capital project. So for example, not so relevant because our road sealing program is finished for the year, but bitumen prices went up 15% in April, just as an example. So that analysis will be complete this week. And the third piece of work that we've got underway is that all of those major operational contracts and the major capital works contracts, we've got legal reviewing the contracts to understand exactly what our legal position is. So is there cost escalation clauses in the contracts? Would we be triggered by some sort of force majeure type component of the contract? Which is one lens, because even if we are contractually protected, let's say there's some sort of fixed price arrangement, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't actually still receive some form of claim or some sort of proposed action from the contractor. So I think we're in a really good position in terms of understanding all this fuel dependency, understanding what would we do in the event of disruption, where is our financial and contractual exposure, and we're working really closely with central government on that. So I think I'll pat everyone internally on the back that we're probably ahead of the curve on that, even to the extent that the local government fuel response unit using our template to collect information nationally.
Thank
So
you.
that's just a quick update.
Much appreciated. Now,
Yeah, thank you for the update. That's helpful. I think I was surprised to get the papers and not have a paper on this, because this is probably one of the bigger risk issues we've got. So it's great to hear, but it's quite hard on the fly to give you feedback on that and to understand what your scenario planning looks like. So it would be great, I think, if we want to be super helpful for the council to have the ability to assess that and to support from a risk perspective. So that was, I suppose, so people want to point to the chair. I thought we should be focusing on those forward-facing and live risks as well. But great to hear, but very difficult to give risk assurance feedback on a verbal update in case again.
Thank you.
Probably,
Sorry, if I just clarify, the papers are prepared like 3 weeks in advance. So, you know, we would have been prepared before that happened.
Do you have a process for when urgent risk issues occur?
Well, the other thing I was just going to say was that we did have risks identified within our risk register of this potential, and so it wasn't a surprise that, you know, this could have an impact. Yeah, so I guess what we're now working with is an issue that now we're trying to prepare ourselves for, but we did already have an identified as a potential risk.
Just, you know, on my other boards, we've received scenario plans so that the impact assessment you've done, which sounds great and comprehensive, so that there's an opportunity to have a look and just kind of kick the tires on that.
Thank you. Good feedback.
my point probably sort of picks up on that, Catherine. Whether it's a question for you, Ian, or for you, Gareth. Do we have a feel for the effect of the current situation and these different scenarios as they may not play out on our existing risk profile? In particular, does the current situation take us outside of risk appetite on any particular risks, or will it? Interested to understand what the longer term view is.
To you, Chair. Happy to respond maybe to the latter part of that question. As Catherine just mentioned, we have done a review of our risks. I suppose the first thing to say is that a risk around unexpected changes in cost, which is one of the risks that is influenced by the current situation, is already outside of our risk tolerance. So you'll see that in the report today. It sits at high. We have a number of treatment plans in place, obviously incorporating changes into the way that we're running for our LTP. So we have a new way of evaluating risks and incorporating projects into the LTP, which considers implications in terms of potential changes in cost, but that sits outside of our risk appetite already. We've made the decision at this point in time, until we have the further information that Ian's referred to in terms of capital projects, to hold that at high. The only alternative would be to increase that to very high, and we haven't felt we've needed to at this point in time.
I might pick up on this theme of risk appetite, if that's okay, Chair.
Go ahead.
Parking the specific BCP issue. You mentioned that the risk's already out of appetite. If I've read that correctly, I think it's telling us that 24 out of 52 deliverable risks outside of appetite. Is that correct? Is my reading of that?
Yes, I don't know exact numbers, but I can say that.
But it's a big difference. Yeah. So my question more broadly is what are your thoughts on that? What the paper describes treatment plans. I think some of those treatment plans have been reported in the manner that they are in this pack in previous meetings. Are sufficient efforts being made, in your view, in the right areas to bring our risks back within appetite? Or, more broadly, this is quite a different question. Is it possible that some of our appetites may not be realistic in some cases? Are we failing to recognise the need for trade-off, for example? I know that we take a generally quite conservative position, but if we try and take that across all risks, we're inevitably going to be outside of appetite. So there's a little bit there. I'm really interested to get yours, Catherine, your thoughts on this. It's helpful context to what this information actually tells.
Can I ask a question about when we're next reviewing council's risk appetite? Is that part of the LTP process? Is it part of the risk policy?
It's both. Obviously, we're going to have a look at the risks. As I said, we've got a new tool through Sentient, our project management tool, to review risks for that purpose of the LTP. Happy to touch on that in more detail if it would be useful. We actually have a workshop set up to talk about the risk management policy, and obviously, a core component of that is the risk appetite statements. I think you're right in terms of where we sit. As I said earlier, we're influenced both by internal things that we can control and external things that we're aware of. Obviously, things like rate of growth, population change, government reforms are things that we can influence, but we can't control. Many of our risks that sit at tier 1 are influenced by that, so we do have a discrepancy. We have treatment plans in place. The previous Audit, Finance and Risk Committee have made recommendations for us to consider bringing risk levels down. The feedback from the business is that they want to wait until some of the treatment plans are embedded and they can confirm that controls are effective. I do think we need to look at that again, and I do that regularly with the business, but you're right, there's a discrepancy between what our appetite states and where we currently sit. I suppose from a risk culture perspective, I'm more comfortable with officers telling us that this is where the risk sits rather than trying to just demonstrate that a risk is within tolerance. We do need to review that and test our assumptions around risk appetite, which is what we intend to do in June.
On the embedment point, I think it's good to differentiate. I think, again, suggestion for consideration might be considering the risks on where you've got policies, procedures, systems and controls in place, where there's an embedment still to happen so that we can see actually how far down the treatment plan are we. So just a consideration when you are doing your risk workshops about framework and how to make that most useful for us, the council.
Yeah, there's a couple of things for me here. It might be more appropriate that we pick them up in the workshop or in a conversation in advance of the workshop. I struggle with your distinction between things you can influence versus control. I think we need to understand what mitigations for risk and strategies for risk management are. I don't think it's as binary internal versus external. I really appreciate your point, Gareth, that you would rather the information coming to this committee present where the risks are actually at. Couldn't agree with them. I think that's hugely important. However, if we have a significant number of risks which are outside of a pre-approved appetite, then we obviously have doubts there. We need to understand what we're going to do or what is realistic to be able to be done to manage those risks back.
It's maybe also criticality, prioritisation amongst those, because I think 34 kind of very high risks is not, I think, reasonable to try to control. So I think understanding the prioritisation within that and which of those risks are really critical that we need to be putting the focus on, so that we're not, I suppose, the spread once got slightly across a number of research, and we're focusing on the key things.
Just a comment, I think the theme probably is that there's some work to do for us to understand the system, and there's some time that's going to be taken to work through some of the detail. And if we're doing the risk policy, there's a workshop on June 2nd, then it's coming to our meeting on the 30th, a tight time frame, just signalling that there's some work to do that we may need to get into reasons quickly.
Gareth, I'm wondering if you can give context around the sensitivity, like when that was actually put into the policy and how we're leading the way in the country in this area. Yeah, because there's the context around this is actually relatively new. So, yeah.
I think we're quite short on time, so I think appreciate that, and I think we can probably take that offline and have that discussion, but maybe I'd quite like to hear if Alistair has anything he would like to add to this one. Sorry, I almost forgot you on the screen.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I probably won't be as vocal this meeting as I might be in person, but I just would just support at a very high level that some of the comments already made, e.g. 32 or 34 tier 1 risks is a lot, and it'd be worth just considering some sort of prioritization there. And then secondly, the fact that 24 are out of risk appetite. I sort of appreciate and understand everything that's been said, and just stepping back and looking at that in total, is that something that we as a committee or the council should be particularly concerned about or not? I don't know the answer to that, but the options are, as Matt suggested. So just supporting what's been said, and happy to contribute to further work in the workshops and so on.
Thank you.
And just a follow-up question on the work you're doing currently. Does the risk review or the review work you're doing at the moment look at financial stability of contractors on the other side of these contracts? Because I worry that what's happening is going to cause some people to fall over.
Yeah.
Is that part of the review that you're doing?
I'd probably say indirectly, but it's a very good point. I think what we 100% recognise is just because a contract may say something, doesn't mean that that's the reality of the situation. And so part of the review has been really close to the contract managers and the project managers to understand what is emerging from those contractors, like what communications are we getting. And I think I'm right in saying that as of today, we haven't had any formal claims or requests for contract adjustment. However, we've definitely got those informal murmurings that are coming.
It's a good point, because obviously you've seen the Reserve Bank's decision on OCR, and also the conversations with the governor yesterday just around what they're expecting to happen with inflation, etc. So it is a good point to think more broadly around how various parties are going to cope with this.
It's a good point.
Excellent. We probably need to keep it moving. Q, do you have anything you wanted to say? I just wanted to say thank you for the work at the bottom of page 8, just around the tier 2 risks. I won't go into it in any detail, but I just thought that was a really positive step. And just around we went through the operation, risk diagrams around the linkages with the operations and maintenance issues that we're having with some of our plant. Just wanted to point out, we didn't link to ineffective governance, and I just wanted to note that it's something that we should always be considering. It's always that, and we need to keep that risk of ineffective governance front of mind. That was all from me on that item. So yeah, I guess at this point, there was some discussion to be had around the risk policy, but I think we've had some discussions, and I think we're all happy that, correct me if I'm wrong, version 3, which is the recommended version, is absolutely where we would like to go. But just in terms of what we're approving, rather than approving the whole policy, because as a group there's some concern that the policy isn't quite there, and staff realise that as well, because this is why we're reviewing it. So discussions are around noting the report, but recommending the change, not recommending the entire report. So in terms of wording, our resolution would be that the Risk Assurance Committee note the contents of this report, and 2, recommend to Council that it adopts the changes in version 3 of the proposed risk management policy. So I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? All right, all in favour?
Hang on, we have a quick discussion.
Oh yeah, we can have a discussion. Absolutely.
Sure.
Sorry.
I just want to understand what the sort of the real effect of this move is, because what it seems to me is it seems to be taking work off the CEO and transferring it to us as a committee. I'm just trying to think through the pros and cons and the risks of that. So and at the moment I haven't quite got it right in my head as to what the major benefits of what we're proposing are. So I'd be interested in your thoughts, Chair.
My thoughts. Okay.
Around this, because it feels like we're transferring a lot of responsibility to a group that's not involved in the day-to-day operation of the business.
So this goes to the function of internal audit, which needs to be separated from management. So if we have the chief executive, directing the internal, approving the internal audit program, we have management inserted right in the middle of our independent audit, which is our eyes and ears. So we need to create as much separation as we can. That's the simplest and fastest, in a quick meeting that I could probably deliver, but maybe Gareth or somebody else would like to add to that.
Look, I'm quite happy to add to it. This committee is charged with oversight for risk management systems. So, as Councillor Barney has said, the role of internal audit supports that. I think it's therefore important and it's good practice. It's what happened in other organisations. The plan for where internal audit is going to actually focus its attention would be endorsed by this committee, not decided entirely within the CEO's office without this committee having any scope to influence what the priorities for internal audit are.
With day-to-day management pay and rations, I presume, sitting with the chief executive, that's the usual split I would have seen.
If I may just add as
Yes.
well, I think it represents part of our evolution on this journey. So when the internal audit role first came into play, the chief executive was more involved in the role. As we're growing and evolving and lining up the best practice, then it makes sense to start to move that away.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments, any other discussion? Right, I will put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Aye. Any against? It's carried. Right, item 2 is our compliance update. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gareth, at the table. Right, so the purpose of this report is to provide a governance update regarding the status of QLDC's compliance program and report on compliance with legislation and consents. I think we can take paper as read unless you have any updates.
Just one comment, because I think it's relevant in terms of where we're at on the maturity curve for this and risks. Both of these policies are very new to us. You'll see that the compliance management policy is one that we've only recently adopted. In terms of implementing the policy, obviously there's a transition period. You'll see in the policy itself that there is some obligations that are requiring us to adapt and change over a period of time. So just referencing that it's very new to us. I think it's a significant step forward in terms of having that formal oversight of where we're at from a compliance perspective. And the only other thing to say is, unfortunately, timing-wise of this meeting means that I haven't got compliance reporting back yet for the period January to March. So we report quarterly, and then our compliance report goes into our quarterly report, so our public report every 6 months. Unfortunately, I don't have an update, so that the information in there is up to date as of the end of December. I recognise that that's quite difficult for the committee.
Okay. Is this going to be how it will be, or from now on you anticipate we will have the information in time for the meeting?
So that's a good question. I mean, ultimately, the previous committee and council worked through timing for the compliance report, and quarterly was considered to be appropriate. More frequently would be a challenge because it requires a lot of time, energy and effort to pull it together. Changing the timing of when we request information would probably not be a significant step, but then it wouldn't neatly fall with the quarters of the year, January to March, April, the following period, etc.
Okay.
But have to take away a different period if that would be helpful.
I think it's important that we make sure this committee has up-to-date information and forward-looking information as well, so that we can actually be useful at preventing issues from occurring. So, yeah, just as a general theme. Right. So, any questions on the paper?
A couple of thoughts from me, if that's okay. One is a smaller one, just the operational risk of having a large number of overdue policies, and what your, I suppose, approach is to catch that up. And this is somewhere where the use of AI can be quite helpful for us and things. So just wondering what your thoughts are on getting us to a more comfortable point.
Happy to respond to that through you, Chair. So yeah, recognise it's not where we want to be. Obviously, we've also recognised that the Deloitte, our external auditors, have identified that some significant policies need to be updated. And our initial approach is to focus on those that are high priority. So myself and the policy team, as well as our information management team, are working with the various parts of the business. You'll see 13 priority policies are currently under review. And there's a connection between the policy obligation that I referenced earlier that kicks in 2027. There'll be an obligation in terms of management for review and updates of policies. The other thing to say is that we're looking to pull a KPI in to make sure that we hold management to account for updating policies. So that's our approach. It is obviously something that we've only recently started reviewing in earnest, but yeah, I appreciate there's a fair amount of work in prioritising that is the best that we can do at this stage.
And then one more standard point really when reading through the paper is in regards to wastewater. And I think so two things on that. One, the Shotover wastewater plant post-incident review, if we consider doing that, that would be normal in a scenario. So an independent post-incident review to pick up what could be done differently better going forward, and taking the learning not just for the specific but applying across these types of projects as a whole. And then I suppose a related point to that, just around I think design operation wastewater plants as a whole, because this is coming through as a bit of a theme. So rather than looking at each individual, what's our approach overall for the risk around end-to-end projects and ongoing asset management.
Thank you. It might be something we can pick up in the resolution. Have a think about as we go through the questions. Would you like a response from?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, it's to say it was a big flashing light for me reading the whole papers actually.
So the question is around the post-incident review.
And then more generally, what are we thinking in terms of management of because it's only a number of issues, thinking about the themes and what you manage going forward.
Yeah, and I think that has to be set within the context of the transition to a water service entity over the next sort of 14 months or so. So yes, there are various pieces of work that have been underway. There's not a formal post-incident review for the Shotover wastewater treatment plant. Our view is very much our time and energy has been looking forward to try and resolve the situation and come up with the best possible option. I don't know, Tony Avery would like to make some further comments and it's involved in the detail. So I don't manage it structure.
Hello.
So, solving this issue right, but there's also how do you make sure things don't.
Absolutely,
yeah.
So I'm Tony, so
Hi,
I'm a GM property and infrastructure. So I should clarify what the question is because I was listening partially and then I suddenly heard that you started with something.
Yes, I think two aspects really. Just so one on the specific post-incident review, which would be best practice when you have these types of issues happening.
So which issue are you talking about?
So Shotover.
Yeah.
And then
which one's taken at that? Discharge?
Yeah. So sorry, I think that's the first one in the table and the
discharge beyond designated.
Yeah. But and then more generally, because there are a few wastewater related things, just what's our general approach for managing end-to-end both establishment of projects, but also the asset management, the risk around that. So that we're not looking at kind of post-back issue by issue, but how we're managing these going forward.
Yeah. So in terms of the Shotover, just briefly, I suppose it's been taken up. The result of the reason for the discharge was because of our inability to meet the consent conditions, which relates back to design of the disposal field that was failing. So that's the simple context. Yeah. That's now been sort of superseded by the short-term consent application in front of the Environment Board, because at the moment we're only able to discharge wastewater under emergency works because we enacted the emergency works to deal with that. We've got a short-term consent, which is then dealing with that component. And then there's a long-term consent process underway to actually make sure that we have a long-term sustainable disposal option for the Shotover wastewater treatment plant. So we can do a post review. We know what happened in that sense. In terms of other wastewater treatment plants, we've got non-compliance, which I think is probably listed down there, and there's processes underway to deal with those. But
So, because you would normally see like a post-incident review would look at decision-making, governance, the whole kind of picture. So an independent review of that when you have something significant which happen like this would be normal. In my experience, but maybe you've got some other things
Yeah,
to say
no,
there.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think it's more a matter of noting and picking up, you know, as we continue to build our own understanding of how all of this hangs together for the county. Certainly from my point of view and Juliet's, wherever there has been a significant incident, we expect a post-incident review. It may or may not be your role to do that, Tony. So, yeah, I think it's important that we understand our expectations for the sort of information that we'd like to see in this committee. But I don't think it's for the here and now to say who does that and where it comes from. I mean, one thing that screams at me through this pack is the amount of work being done by what looks and feels like an extremely small team across the organisation. So the last thing we want to do is start handing out, you know, more actions. I did have a follow-up question on this short-term consent, Tony, if that's okay. And you have to forgive me if my reading of this will be it's just way off base.
don't believe everything you're reading.
No, exactly. But I understand you mentioned the environmental. I believe there was. Is it the short-term consent or the emergency powers that have there's a deadline by which we have to have a longer-term plan?
Quickly run through. So we were experiencing difficulties with the disposal project. It was uncontained, without loading. So we actually made the difficult decision to use the emergency powers of the RMA to move to a direct discharge to the Shire River through an old panel, because that was felt to be the best outcome of a mix of very poor potential options. As part of the emergency works procedures, and Brendan's getting correct or wrong, we needed to apply for consent. We're able to carry on the discharge only because we enacted emergency works. So the short-term consent was applied for, we've applied for 5-year term to give us the ability to carry on discharging with them. Assuming we get that consent, which will be discharged into the show. As part of that, we also had time implications imposed upon us to then apply for a long-term consent that would substitute for the short-term. So there's some time frames imposed around that through the mediation, the environment court mediation process. I think in broad sense, that's where we're at the moment.
Those deadlines, they're quite soon.
They're very soon. And so council's just considered a report 2 weeks ago around a long-term disposal option, which they've agreed to proceed with, and some caveats around that. So we've got time frames to meet for an application for long-term consent, which would be for a discharge directly into the cover for a rock output, and then there's a lot of things we need to do around other options. So we're presently in a mediation process in the Environment Court, mediating with the parties around the short-term consent. We're hopefully get a 5-year consent before that discharge, otherwise we are in significant difficulties because we have no consentable option at that point for an ongoing discharge. And then there's this, as part of the environmental process, we had some time frames imposed by which time we needed to apply for a long-term consent, which is that we were complete.
So I suppose my question was then, given that the subject of this committee is risk and uncertainty around, are you comfortable that the council is on track to meet its time frames as imposed, if that's the right word, by the environment court, or are there any concerns that you would like to raise here that might require our collective thinking on?
The very tough decision for council 2 weeks ago was around agreeing or not agreeing to a proposal for a long-term consent application, which council agreed to, subject to a number of other things we need to do. That gives us confidence in terms of that time frame.
I just think, we need to be quite focused. We haven't got a lot of time in this meeting, so really crisp answers would be great. Just if there are any risks that you foresee going forward.
Are we on track to lodge our
Are we on
application by the 31st of May?
You've heard the question. Yes.
And
Yeah.
perhaps are there any risks around the consenting that might mean that we don't meet a 30 deadline would be the other question.
Well, I think there are always risks around the consenting process and application. We've got short-term consent risk if we don't get that consent with the short-term, that's a significant risk. So we're mitigating that through a very careful approach to that application using external lawyers and advisors.
And scenario planning for if that doesn't come through.
Yeah, in terms of, well, it'd be interesting because if we don't get that consent through, then we will struggle to have a compliant consent discharge. Right? So that there is a significant risk there. The long-term consent, we've got everyone in place to propose deal with that by the time frames, but nothing is without risk in terms of that consent environment.
I just think I think what I'm sensing here is that this is one of our significant risks going forward, and we may well need to do a bit of a deep dive into it as part of this committee, but we probably won't resolve that today. We may want to resolve to ask for that, but we can take that offline.
Yeah.
But I know you have the question.
Julianne, Matt, what I'm trying to understand is what you're questioning, because if you're questioning what I think you are, I think it's called for, and that is the vote that Tony referred to on March 17th. 7 to 5, to continue with the discharge and to the shutover, but eventually under the Colorado. Does that merit an independent review, both past and going forward? What the outcome of the vote was that staff internally would do a review of what our options were and would report back to us in 1 year. But again, that would be staff. But what you're proposing is an independent review.
And not just going forward. I think it's the right thing to do to review the entirety, actually, to learn from that, actually to understand whether what the governance implications are for that decision making, etc. So that again, when thinking about things going forward, we can make sure we've adjusted any. We recommend to you to adjust anything within that might need to be adjusted going forward to stop reoccurrence in a different.
I think it has merit. I support it. I'm not sure how we get there, but in any case, I want to read to the board.
Just a point of clarification on that. When you're talking about independent external review, are you talking about with regards to the failure that led to the discharge? Yes. You are, not the entire process that we're engaged in with all our major decisions and things along the way.
Not necessarily.
I think you have to
narrow it, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't imagine if we touch it, so I think we're going to land on the exact scope today, but
I don't think it's our role to second guess the decision.
Not insurance, but
I have to
yes, okay.
Yeah. Look, and I think just a quick one from me too. Michelle mentioned the context around the water services CCO, and I think for me, there's a real risk that if we do a lift and shift into the CCO, if we don't do a review of what has gone on and what led to it, all the different factors, I think that in itself is a risk, and we're probably missing an opportunity to ensure that that organisation is as effective as it can be. Anyway, so look, I'll put the question on the table. Is there appetite to recommend a review? We have powers under our terms to recommend to full council. We could do that. Governance can interrupt me if they think that there's an issue with that, but sometimes if you don't do things, nothing gets done. If there is an appetite around this table to have an independent review of what has gone on, then it's within our powers to recommend that to full council. Just putting it out there.
Yes, I'm not in favour of that.
Yeah. Thoughts?
Is that scope?
Look, I think when I think back to what failed, it was as far as I'm aware, the dose and drain that failed, and I'm not sure getting a report that tells us that it failed gets us any further.
So why it did, as opposed to that.
Yes, but if we're not moving to another dose and drain type technology, then I don't understand the benefit in getting a report on why it failed.
I can speak personally to that because there are processes that.
But I think this is an issue that the full council is discussing and transversing and does have a plan, and we are complying. We're going to be complying because we do by the 31st of May have lodged that application. I think what we're planning and what's been done is because it feels to me it's such different things. I'm not sure there's great learnings to come from spending a whole lot of money on an independent report around what happened. That's my personal view.
For me, the risk of adding to what already sounds like a packed agenda for the risk policy workshop session, I think incident reviews, and this is a big incident, and therefore on the face of it, it's a big review. Incident reviews are an important part of a joined up risk management approach. If we don't take the opportunities at the right time to understand what happened, and my view is along the food chain, not just the root cause, but the decisions along the way, to the extent that that's relevant, then we run the risk of not learning from what's happened in the past, and being able to apply what we learn to prevent or detect other similar issues in the future. That's pretty standard risk management. So I don't think we need to litigate now the scope and form of an incident review. I do think it's part of an overall sort of policy discussion. I come back again to this issue of resource. We've got to decide where we apply resource. Certainly, investigating incidents and understanding what they tell us so that we can prevent reoccurrence. That has to be something that we do.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I'm just going to echo your sentiment a little bit there, in that I'm hearing that there is appetite around the table here to have more understanding about process and the triggers that may bring about an independent review, and a bit more thought around the scope of what an independent review may be. And because I'm just really aware that this committee hasn't had sort of a proper assessment of pros and cons to be making that recommendation onto full council. It could be something that we trigger the background in the workshop, and then decide there if actually what do you want to see a further paper, so that you can then make a more informed recommendation onto council. Would that be a potential way forward?
Yeah,
I think that would be. Right, so would you like us to note that in the resolution, or is it the intention to bring it back to the next meeting?
I think if we're going to come to the workshop and bring a point to give you the overview of the existing process and how it may need to be reconsidered in terms of the internal triggers.
I think there's two things here. There's the how do we deal with reviews, and how does it fit into our risk policy? The other thing is a very specific issue around whether we need an investigation or an independent review into what happened.
I think wouldn't that flow on from a better understanding?
I think there are two things, and I think I'd like absolutely to go through that through the risk policy through the workshop. But I think I personally would like it to come back to a workshop and do a deeper dive with the pros and cons of a review of what has gone on at the treatment plant. That's my view.
Yeah, happy for that. But I do agree with Matt that I think it should be a part of the risk management outflow. The triggers and scope can be really through, and yes, it's happy for recommendations once you get a chance to think about that.
Chair, could I just make a comment? Yeah, I'm very conscious I'd have negligible background in what's happened, but someone just made a comment about a particular technology failed, and so I guess what I would be thinking about is, in principle, what was the decision-making process that led to particular decisions to be made to adopt certain technologies? Were there decision points? Could you learn along the way that if we'd done something differently, that outcome wouldn't have occurred? What was our decision-making process? What were our options? What can we learn from it, rather than the actual technical fact that a particular technology didn't work? And so, in principle, I'm supporting doing something. In practice, I just don't have enough detail to, have a view on what precisely should occur and when and what the scope would be. But in principle, learning from a decision-making process, so that if something happened again, we would hopefully make a better decision. That would be good.
So just in order to be helpful, this has been traversed with the council previously through a series of workshops where we daylighted why the disposal field had failed for them, so we can actually provide all that information to you. We can do that in a workshop setting. I think it'd be useful to understand what we've already done.
Yeah.
And where we're going to, which may help in terms of if you want to do a review, making it more focused, because there's a lot of information that we've shared already on this.
Okay, is that something that you can do without a resolution, or would you like something?
Yeah, we can just add it to your folder. Yeah. On draft.
Yeah. All right, and then we can
take that.
and then we can rediscuss it in the same session.
The next time the workshop would be great.
I think workshops are a really good environment for conversation.
All right,
And the other thing we're just conscious of is those same people that would be doing the review or assisting the review would be the people that are doing the consent. So we wouldn't have availability of staff to help with the review.
We've got to get it in by the 30th of May.
all right. Any other comments before I?
I've got some questions, just on something different. Gareth, I'm just aware that through a number of staff having left or leaving the planning and development department, that processing timeframes for various resource consent applications, 244C applications, are starting to really slow up. Is that something that's got to your radar yet at all?
Through you, Chair. Not specifically in terms of recent times, but obviously we have the risks in our risk register in that space around recruiting and retaining staff, having to take it away and see whether that needs to be adjusted in the risk register, but it is in the risk register. Yeah, there's a longer term risk.
Thank you.
Very quickly, very
Standing
short.
orders, committed.
Only if
Yep, so I'm not involved in the conversation. I'm John Mitchell, I'm one of the councillors here. I'm the emergency management representative for the council on behalf of the mayor. I'd just like to raise that, and I absolutely agree with what you say about a need for review. It is best practice in an emergency management context, and I cannot help but mention what is happening in Christchurch right now. The Christchurch City Council have just done a post-response review 5 years after their wastewater treatment plant failed catastrophically in a fire. And they have found that they should have managed that substantially differently. And they've lost significant opportunities in the interval of 5 years to have managed things differently. I think the council would be remiss if we didn't do so. In particular, in that case, it should have been dealt with as an emergency.
I think where we've landed is that it would be helpful with the new committee if we have some more information. It may be that down the track we make a recommendation, but at this point in time, it's a little bit awkward to make.
Absolutely.
But yes, that's exactly right. It's like the longer, I mean, you've got the immediate things that need to be dealt with, obviously, and that's going to take priority, but quick on the heels of that.
Right, so thanks for the discussion, really helpful. I'm going to, at this point, draw this one to a close so we can move on. So I will resolve that the Risk and Assurance Committee note the contents of the report. Do I have a second? Thanks, David. All in favour? Oh, and this is further discussion, but all in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Right, thank you, carried. Item 3, we have our insurance update. Again, Kara. So the purpose of this report is to provide a governance update regarding the status of QLDC's insurance program and associated claims. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I suppose just to touch on the fact that we do have a significant claim in relation to the fire at Frankton Golf Centre that occurred in December. We're obviously going through that process with our insurance. We have had a progress claim and we're working through balancing, obviously, getting the centre back up and running as best as we can because it's a revenue generator for us, doing what we need to do as a prudent uninsured to meet our expectations of our insurer in terms of making sure that we don't have a ever-growing business interruption claim. And then assessing options in terms of replacing the facility. So that is still underway. We had a workshop last week to go through potential options so that we can obviously take them through governance to get feedback. Other than that, unfortunately, because of where it sits with our insurer, I'm not in a position to provide any additional information at this stage, other than to say that Council last week received the fire cause analysis investigation report, and we're working through that. purpose of health and safety, as well as understanding the implications for us in terms of our insurance.
Thank you. Any questions?
No questions for me.
None. Right. I think that might be one that can make up a lot of time. If there are no questions, Alison, did you have anything on that item? No, great. Okay, in that case, thank you for your report, and I will move that the Risk and Assurance Committee note the contents of this report. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favour? Aye. Aye. Excellent. Right, item 4, Lakeview Development Program. Paul, thank you. Thanks, Emma. Appreciate it.
Matt, and I'll be out to now and say hello, Alison. Hope you're well. So I've got to do my bit to you now. My name is Megan Murphy. I'm the General Manager of Corporate Services, and strategic projects sits within my remit, and I work together with the strategic projects director, Paul Speedy. So that's why I'm here, and now I'll hand over to Paul, who I'm sure will be able to answer any of your questions.
Oh, sorry, we can go straight to questions if there's something
There was a very
to add, correct? Does anyone around the table have any questions? Oh.
Well, I sent around a quick email last night, and it was expanded on and adjusted and edited by the chair. And literally, the more that I look at Lakeview, the less I understand. And a lot of that has to do around the modifications, variations, and changes that have taken place since 2019. We are answerable for this. I'm not looking for a gotcha moment or anything like that. I literally feel that at some level we need to, one way or another, readdress this either through a workshop or through some sort of deep dive, perhaps with a small group of people, because I, for one, cannot answer many of the questions that might be posed around Lakeview and around the original intentions and the original contracts, some of the modifications that have taken place since then. And admittedly, a lot of this is a result of the fact that I have been literally arrived in this spot 6 months ago and not 3.5 years ago. So I apologize for that ahead of time. Why don't you fill in, because I had requested a workshop and you had suggested otherwise.
So Q suggested that we have a workshop on Lakeview. I thought potentially it would be useful to have a deep dive into it. There is the ability for us to do that as a committee. Sometimes, because I think a lot of this plays into the things that we've already talked about, which is ongoing project management risk, looking forward and how are we managing these big things. But sometimes it's very useful to have the context of a specific project and how we're doing it currently to help us understand what might need to change. That's my thinking on it anyway. So I'm thinking it would be something that you would need to do probably in PX, because it would probably need to look at the development agreement and the risk management within that contract as well, and how we are utilising and implementing that contract. That's just my view from experience, but I'd be interested to hear what others have to say.
Yeah, so I think what I thought seeing this was actually raised questions for me just around kind of portfolio risk as a whole, and just understanding that landscape and the risk management around that, and how we're kind of integrating that into how we're managing across the portfolio as opposed to a bit detail of it. So that was the question I had, and that just maybe because they lack of induction, not quite knowing how you do that. So perhaps those are the questions that I had.
My position is probably very similar. I have observations rather than questions. You know, of course, the paper raises lots of questions, but they're very specific about Lakeview. That's good. but actually coming to this committee new and trying to bring a lens of how can this committee operate to fulfil its obligations under the terms of reference, to really understand the overall risk profile of the council, then I'm more interested to see a portfolio view of the risks to projects. This talks a lot about timeline. There's nothing about cost. There's nothing about the sort of quality of the outcome. That's why I'm giving the papers here to explain. But it's probably more a conversation, Catherine, for the sort of broader purpose of papers to this committee, from my perspective. And I think that sort of builds on what you're saying, Julia. Understanding the total risk exposure that our portfolio of strategically important projects exposes the council to is a really, really important piece of business for this committee. So that's not necessarily a question for you guys.
No,
it's
no.
not a question about
Would you define that as property or a?
for me, it's more broad. Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's stuff that we need to get into in a bigger conversation. Where do you draw the line between the things that really meet the definition of the business of this committee? I mean, there'll be a million things going on downstairs right now that people are calling projects and working on. Not everything needs to be here or be reported on as part of a collective portfolio. So I think we've got to think, quite carefully and strategically about what those things are, so that we're focusing our attention on them.
So if we do focus on Lakeview, sure. Which is, I think, I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity yet to read the Bruce Robson report that was included in the folder that you have access to now.
No.
I think that would be incredibly helpful context. I think your chair suggested that for you to understand and appreciate why this paper report's here to this committee, and that will be very helpful. In terms of risk today, it might be useful for Paul to perhaps comment a little bit about how risk applies to the Lakeview project, if that's useful for you, and then we can just answer any other questions you may have. But I do recommend you look at that context. You've also got the developer agreement that's also included in the bundle that you have.
Yeah, and that was just provided yesterday, so I don't expect
No.
anybody will get a chance.
And the council report. And I think for any, on the back of today, certainly this is a complex, for any council to be managing a project of this nature, it is complex. And so it has long been, a real journey for everyone to understand, and it's been, I guess, publicly, there has been a profile around Lakeview, and it hasn't always been favourable. And I guess what I would say about that is when Paul has taken the time with individuals to sit down and step through this project in detail, the mist starts to rise. So I think if you were interested, I think if we're going to continue with this reporting regime to this committee, a deep dive would probably be a good idea, which we could probably do in a workshop from here again, where you can just ask any questions that you have. But I do recommend that reading and behind the scenes.
We can probably take that offline. Yeah.
Yes.
Could you explain for the members how risk is managed across the program going forward? Is that something you can speak to now? Because we haven't given you fair warning of that. We're in this committee, but
is there something you'd like as well?
That could be part of a deep dive. Would that be a better? And I can just follow.
I'm not sure that's a question Paul can answer, but it's probably a conversation we'll need to have, including Paul with GMT.
Yeah. Look, I've just got a couple of specific questions on the paper. Does anyone, before I do it, anyone else got anything?
Well, I suppose it's just
yeah.
Six clarification what I would want to be coming to this committee is a view of project risks across all risks, lifting this up. Now, by doing that, you will inevitably then get into the details and specifics on particular projects. But for me, this isn't about a deep dive on Lakeview. This is about, it's a consistent theme really with some of the conversations in earlier matters. Bringing information that really allows us to have a broader view of risks rather than a specific project, which is sort of
The complication with this is it's a resolution of council to bring it to this committee.
Oh, so
Yeah,
So,
that's the context, Jenny, why.
yeah. And if you read the report, that will flow on. So, there will be some things to
there's a
talk
direction to review, which
This
gives
is
no
quite
case of.
specific thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
about. We can have the two sitting alongside, and eventually if they merge. But I think for now, direction of council is to have this report come to us. It's just a case of whether we have the right information in it to make it as useful as it needs to be. I do have a specific question, just around the consents that are required. So we've just settled on stage 1, and already we're looking at moderate risk of not meeting timeframes. And the reason for that seems to be, although it's not entirely clear, that there are still consents to be gained, building consent, resource consents. Just could you clear up for me, is that part of the reason for the expected delay?
Yeah, so you use the terminology we. Are you talking about?
I'm not sure what I said.
Yeah, you said ours.
I'm thinking
We're not.
council. So you're right, their consents. Is it consents, the lack of consents that, because I'm looking at a 6 to 9 month delay before anything substantive gets going, is what I'm feeling from the paper. If that's not correct, let me know. But is that because consents haven't been gained at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, just to clarify, risk management, you need to be quite clear who's responsible for that risk. So the risk for delivery of the milestone here that is under a moderate risk and sits with the developer.
Yes,
so it's there.
But the financial risk sits with us, and I guess what we were wanting as part of the project objectives, because there's risk around that as well, is that we did not want a land banking scenario. We wanted things to move quickly, and so the next stage can begin, and so that we, money coming in is important to our balance sheet.
So for stage 1, we've been paid.
We've been paid.
Yeah, so and the developer is in their program has said that they are on track for meeting the stage 1 completion, but there is some moderate risk around the successful construction.
Right, and
milestone. And why the moderate risk from the first milestone has gone to the completion milestone, because if the time frame is extended, it stacks up. So
are there consents that need to be gained that haven't been at this point?
They need some approval from our Parks and Reserves team to do some works on reserve land. And I think that has to go to full council and delegation from the Ministry of Conservation. So they're working, Parks team are working on that. And I think at the workshop, the developer had at council, I think some of the councillors asked directly about some of the risks. And I think the opportunity for council laws to talk directly to the developer around that.
I guess I can probably, because just to clarify my point, part of our management of risk is the way the DA is set up, and making sure that all conditions of settlement are met before we settle. Otherwise, other options become available. I'm just concerned that we have just settled, all of these things were supposed to be in place so that construction could begin immediately. And it doesn't seem that that's the case. And I just want to flag that as a risk around how we're managing the DA inside us. It's okay.
Do you want me to address it?
If you've got something specific.
Yeah, so once we settle with the developer on stage, obviously the risk transfers very much to the developer. So that's why we have quite a high bar for making sure that they have everything in place, so we have some comfort that they'll be able to get on and do things in a timely fashion. So the development program that they provided, obviously, it's a $260 million first stage construction, so they have their finance in place. And then they, specific to what the chair is talking about here, is whether they've got all their consents and approvals in place in order to meet that complete the state. The program that they provided, and because we looked at it quite closely, they had a streamlined program approach where they would look to start certain areas, and they had sufficient consents in place to start the program within their lot. So they met the settlement conditions for the lot, but their program also has works outside of their lot, which relate to the council's works obligation, which is to do some stormwater works outside of the lot. And the compromise here is working with the reserves team on the back there around some works that are there for us to meet our own requirements with our consenting team. Now, there's been discussions internally around that, and there's obviously been discussions between the council representatives and the consenting side, and directly with the developer around how they do that. So, in short, they provided a program of works that displayed their ability to do the work.
I think we're getting
fully funded and get started and
detail.
First lot.
I'm just going to stop you there because I think we're getting into detail that we could probably reverse elsewhere. And just because we've got a packed agenda, it's really useful.
Yeah, well, the point is that that approval will go to full council through the Parks and Reserves team. And sure.
Thank you. So look, if anyone's got anything else,
Just a few sentences for management context. I agree that we should do, a process-wide review of project management. But the funny thing about Lakeview is it's so gigantic and it's so different than all the others that it, from my perspective, again, the council, is that it sits off in its own little world. We're talking about $1 billion project, and it's very unique. And Megan mentioned the Bruce Robertson report, which had to deal with literally the delegation solely around that project. So the reason why I'm asking for, on the one hand, yes, an overall view, an umbrella review, but specific to this, it's absolutely unique. And having been an asset management work with property developers, and that's what they're not working with them, but seeing how they work, they have their own language. There are many wiggles that are things that are only acquired for many, many years. And so I realized that I'm very naive in looking at this, and that's why I requested a specific Lakeview thing.
Yeah, I've just got one.
No, we're running out of time. I'm going to probably call it here and let us move on. I think what we need to do, because I think we can take this offline. Sorry, we've just got a really packed agenda.
Well, there's one holding delegation. It's important for everyone around here to.
Excuse me, sorry.
Decisions made by full council versus
this. Please, we have a really packed agenda, and I would love to hear it, but we just need to move on. I think the point is that there is a lot to learn about Lakeview. I think we can take it offline. I think we can we can organise a workshop into it. I think there's nothing we can probably decide at this point because we have a new committee. They don't have the full context and they feel uncomfortable. I think we just probably need to move to the next item unless anyone's got anything else.
I think we can undertake to have a one-on-one session with you, Q, if it's helpful. And
I think we need to have a group, and so I'll talk to Catherine about that afterwards, and maybe yourself, Megan. But I do think we need to move on. So thank you. So I'm going to put the motion. So again, we are asking that the Risk Insurance Committee note the contents of the report. I'm going to move. Do I have a seconder? Would anyone like any discussion? Sorry. Is there any further?
No, but it's helpful to your context in terms of scale, and it's going to be over the threshold for closer monitoring of this committee, and it makes sense alongside the portfolio view.
Yeah. So I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Thanks. And look, we're going to need to look at longer meetings, I think, so we can have some.
Yeah.
dashboard into some of the stuff. Right, item 5, it's page 170 of the papers. And we are looking at the annual report, annual report management letter from Deloitte. So I'd like to invite Deloitte to the table. So we have Mariano, our internal auditor, Darren, who we've met, Hannah and Katie from Deloitte. Is there anything you'd like to add?
With your permission, just a very brief introduction to Mariano, because time come to the table. As I said earlier, there's 2 parts to the assurance committee. Mariano picks up our third line role, so internal audit. He's our internal audit manager. He comes with a whole host of experience from Argentina. He is a trainer in internal audit, and he's had a very long career. Sorry.
Not at all.
Penitent me. Penitent notes. In audit in Argentina, particularly in retail sector. So thank you. And I'll leave the Deloitte team to maybe introduce themselves.
Sure. So hi, I'm Hayley Racklock. So I'm the appointed auditor for the King Queensland Council. This is Hannah Kennedy, so she's the audit manager. So we're a pretty tight team in terms of council, but we also have a good team that works underneath us as well. I guess just for context, this is actually the management letter that related to last year's audit and just some of the feedback. This is some of the things that I guess we didn't see as significant in terms of our opinion, but just things we wanted to bring up with management we found along the way that we thought was relevant. Anything that was probably of a more critical nature would have actually gone into our full report that came directly to this committee. This was one that went to management, obviously it's shared with the committee as well. So there's just context, there are sort of 2 reporting aspects to the audit.
Thank you.
Can I just add one other point as well, because I think it's quite important for the committee. So Mariano's role here is principally obviously to have oversight of this report and make sure that he's tracking the response from the organisation. So we have no role, Mariano has no role in terms of providing a report to you, other than obviously presenting the information that comes independently from the Deloitte team.
Thank you. Any questions?
The one question I had on the first part of the paper is page 171 of the consolidated pack. As of the date of this paper, 2 of the 12 recommendations for reduction, is that correct? Really?
Yes.
So my question was whether we have any understanding of what looked like a delay. And I appreciate this is on you. I don't know if you have an explanation of context, but these are findings as at 1 July last year. Here we are in April. Deloitte are about to tell us about starting their field work in advance of this financial year. So yeah, I'm just interested in the broader context, which is holding up the closure.
Yeah, absolutely. So the recommendation is of fix is different. Some are simple to implement. Another model 5, the leg one is attached for an upgrade in CI when our main Tech 1 system. That take a long time, a lot of work that is coming at the end of the year. That's the reason was delayed and did not start. I received an update. They already investigated all of those and have completed already. But it's done.
Would it be possible then in future meetings that we understand the committed to times? Because I appreciate some of these might be while they're not starting and posting stuff.
Yeah.
Just to give them the context that says, okay, there are 12 actions, they're going to be done in this time frame, and here's where we're at against that. Because right now there's a 10 out of 12 things.
Yeah.
Start date.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm following over 100 recommendations from all my internal audits. This is part of the recommendation that I'm following up. all they have a different weight, different complexity. So the number doesn't say much. It's not about the whether they're more critical or not. But yeah, in my reporting we can have a look for that.
Perhaps we can have a think about
how to report
physicality as well. Because again, I'm sorry if I'm running like a broken record, but all of these things tell us something about our control environment and therefore our risk profile. If we have actions that have been recommended to be done, especially by our external auditors and internal audits, there has to be a reason for the action even to be done in the first place, and therefore not doing it or not doing it on a permanent basis. What are the implications of that? Do they take us outside the risk outside and so on? So that's the sort of information that we've been hoping to sort of bring together.
And the trade-offs and comfort around that, I guess, too. So, because it goes to resourcing. Are we sufficiently resourced to address these issues that you find?
Sounds like another workshop agenda.
It does. We've got a few.
And I want just one other thing really, which is just around the internal forward risk and the kind of access controls around IT. I think that is a bigger risk than in all organisations than anticipated. It is a bigger threat than often given credit for. So we're just thinking about undead resourcing constraints. About what other controls we put to mitigate some of that segregation.
Heidi, did you? Sorry, just to really quickly touch on that. I guess we will also come back as part of this year's audit, and I suppose that's probably important for this committee to know that we will report against where the status of these are as part of this year's audit, whether they are new findings or if they're existing and where they're at. So I guess you will get that feedback loop from the external audit process anyway. And I guess as I touched on, these were ones that were not significant control findings. So from a criticality point of view, they would have been in the other report that went directly to the committee. And some of these are timing and that they wouldn't actually occur until year end. So
all of those are the ones that did go to the committee addressed.
That's probably the more
been part of our planning process. I did.
Right.
Thank you.
Questions? Alistair? That's I think we'll pick up on all of the things that need to be captured and take that forward. Again, would anyone like to move that the Risk and Assurance Committee note the contents of the report?
Yeah, fine.
Juliet, move, Joe, seconder. Thanks, all in favour? Right. Carried. We are up to item 6, Deloitte Reporting Report for that 25-26 audit. Welcome. So for everyone watching, the purpose of this report is to communicate all the planning matters arising from the audit of the financial statement of the Queensland Executive Council and its controlled entities for the year ending 30th of June 2026. Is there anything you'd like to add to your report?
maybe just really briefly, just to give the context.
I'm just going to introduce Caleb. Yeah. Say what your role is.
Yep, so I'm the business planning manager here at QLDC. Our role primarily with the audit is to work with the audit team, to make sure that we stick to time and that all staff are able to engage in the process and get it done.
Thank you.
So I'll take the documents as read, but I guess just to give you some context, you've got 3 things in front of you. So I'm appointed auditor under the Public Audit Act on behalf of the Auditor General. The engagements are normally issued for a 3-year period, so that's why you'll see you've got an engagement letter for 26, 27 and 2028 in front of you. As part of that, we also do an audit proposal letter, which includes the proposed fee. You'll see there in that proposal letter there is only 2 years proposed for the fee, and I think just to give context, there's so much going on around the water services entity and so little guidance and certainty at the moment, it's really hard to kind of propose what the time and cost might be associated with that when that entity becomes auditable. So that's why we haven't gone to that sort of 2-year period. And I guess just to highlight that, to the third year of that. And I guess our role, it's not just the financial statements, it's also so it's a sort of a fair presentation over the financial statements that are in your annual report. It's also over the service performance that's provided in your annual report. There's also a whole bunch of disclosures that are required under the Local Government Act under Schedule 10. So there's a whole lot of really specific things to local authorities that are in your annual report that we also provide assurance over. So I'm happy to take questions. I guess probably the best place. I'm very conscious of the time.
So we've got a little bit now. Okay. Thank you. This is important. So,
you answered the first one of mine about the 3 quarters. So that's thank you. The second question I had was just audit approach with kind of potential financial impacts of the proposed government rate cap.
Yeah, so we did put that in there as an area of interest because I guess it's very topical at the moment, and obviously it's not certain yet as to where that goes. And probably on sort of a side that we didn't pop in there, but something that is coming out and we're starting to see is because of that cap, we know that the local government funding authority is starting to ask questions of councils. Sort of historically, you could have just kept kind of upping your rates and repaying because you had your percentage of rates that you could take your debt out against. When that cap gets imposed, when it's against non-growth assets, then it's actually going to start to question, can you make those repayments and can you sustain the debt level? So that is something that is becoming quite important and something that's probably a little bit new to be thinking about, particularly as we go into the long-term plan, less so for this particular audit, but definitely on the radar.
Yeah. Also around, I guess, the water services CCO and the guarantees from that. Yeah. And then we've got the ratepayer assistance scheme, which is in the wings as a potential. So it'd be interesting to see how it's dealt with.
And comes to risk, the portfolio risk for the prior item as well, actually too. So sort of thinking about that in that macro sense. So yeah, a little bit on the radar, and we'll look forward to further discussions.
I have a couple of questions more about audit approach.
Okay.
What does this mean from this profile or environment hat? So they're quite specific questions, but we talk across pages 199 and 200 about we'll use some data analytics for rates. Love that. Big fan of using data analytics techniques. We won't do any data analytics on journal controls though on the following page. I'm interested to understand a bit the reason there.
So 2 things. So we do data analytics on the journals. So we have that 100% population and do. I guess from an audit perspective, we have 4 factors that we run across populations to so we absolutely do.
Yep.
The comment there is around control, that we're not doing operating effectiveness controls. We look at the design and implementation of them.
Yep.
And the reason for that is that you really need to have control reliance across your IT applications to be able to then take control reliance on those journal entries. And that's the piece we don't have.
And that was my second question. Page 203, we say no operational effectiveness testing. On the previous page, though, we were talking about IT application controls and IT general controls. My reading though was that we would seek to test IT controls. Have I misunderstood that? And are we really saying that we don't feel we are confident enough in the consistent operation of those controls, hence we take the approach?
I'll try and answer it, but Helen might jump in because she'll certainly probably answer it better than I will. But essentially, I think where we're at is that we have our IT specialists look at the particular applications that are relevant to the financial reporting in particular, and also the service reporting. What they do is look at the design and implementation of those controls, and that's why some of those findings have come through. I think there has been an assessment in the past that we wouldn't be able to achieve operating effectiveness over those particular applications at the time, and I understand that probably as that upgrade happens, we're very much more likely to be able to do that with the CIA, I believe, and that's when our IT team will try and look to do that. That's sort of the where we're at.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Alison, do you have anything you wanted to?
Just one minor question. When I read on page 220 about fees, it says the fee excludes any additional audit procedures required in relation to climate change. And so I was just wondering what is required in relation to climate change, or you're not doing anything in relation to climate change. I just wanted you to expand on that.
Sure. So there's nothing regulatory that's required for climate change for you. You're not a climate reporting entity by any stretch.
Right.
But what we do have to consider is the particular measures, performance measures that you do have. And if
Yeah.
there was in your, and as part of the LTP process, I guess I'm thinking about that, if there were particular climate targets within that, then yes, we would have to assure over them. At the moment, and forgive me, I haven't got the wording in front of me, so I don't exactly remember, but there's a target in there relating to climate reporting that effectively says that you have to, or whoever your provider is, do your assurance every year. So we can check that. But if you had something like, and you don't have it, but if you had an emissions target reduction in there of something, we would have to assure over that. So that's the piece that, yeah, we call out. So there is nothing specific.
Okay, but we did.
Okay.
We did use to, you used to do that correctly, and then we moved to actually the external accreditation, which is probably more robust.
Right, okay.
But it's simpler. These guys.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Great, done. Okay, so I'm going to ask that somebody move that we note the contents of the report and recommend to council that the signatories sign the engagement letter and audit proposal letter on behalf of council. Would you like to move? Kieran, second. Juliet, thanks, all in favour?
Yes.
Aye, anyone against? Thank you. Juliet, item 7, we need to move into public excluded. Right, so I'm going to, we've got 4 items. So item 7, 8, 9 and 10, internal assurance report, cybersecurity update, legal update, and a meeting with our internal and external auditors. So I'm going to move that we move into public excluded with, so we've got a new resolution. We just need to have Hayley and Hannah be able to remain at the salary job. Okay. Right. So I'm going to move that the public be excluded from the following parts of the meeting: item 7, item 8, item 9, and item 10, previously described, and that the representatives from Deloitte be permitted to remain in the meeting during the public excluded part of the meeting because their knowledge is important to the discussion. Do I have a seconder?
No.
All in favour? Aye, carried.
Yes.
Right. Then we need to recording. Stop the recording.